organization, and it fosters spaces for inclusive, respectful, and compassionate conversations, just like the one we're having today. I invite you to share your name and affiliation with URI in the chat. Let us know how you heard about today's program, and we'd also love to know where in the world you are joining us from. So, as we enter into this conversation in the midst of the election season in the United States, with voting already underway, we are well aware of the increased polarization and disinformation that can often fuel division. However, faith communities can play a vital role in promoting peace, integrity, and ethical engagement during these times. This webinar is about how we can come together to prevent violence, encourage dialogue, and counteract harmful narratives like hate speech and disinformation. Before we move into our presentations, I'd like to offer a thought that might resonate with us all in these intense times. My favorite philosopher, Winnie the Pooh, once said, "A little consideration, a little thought for others makes all the difference." It's a simple reminder of the power of kindness and thoughtfulness in everything we do, especially as we navigate these challenging political waters. Let's carry that sentiment with us today as we seek ways to elevate peaceful and ethical engagement in our communities. We are joined by an amazing group of experts. Karen Volker, who is URI's Director of Partnership and Violence Prevention, and she will lead us in understanding strategies to prevent violence. Medina Moore from the Arizona Faith Network, who will speak about the role of local faith networks in promoting peaceful engagement. And the organizer of this amazing webinar, Geneva Blackmer from the URI Right Here and so many other amazing organizations. And she'll share insights on addressing hate speech and disinformation. So here's the flow for today. We'll start with our presentations, and then we'll move into a panel discussion and Q&A session where we want to engage in deeper dialogue and address your questions. So please feel free to use the chat. We want to discuss the things that matter to you and to consider your thoughts and questions. So our presenters have a lot to share, so I want to turn the virtual platform over to them. We'll begin today with Karen. Go ahead, take it away. The virtual platform is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the Winnie the Pooh quote. I love that. So I am going to share my screen so I can talk to you a little bit about the health approach to violence prevention, and in the context here of what we're talking about, which is in the context of the elections. So let me just move this off and I'll go to presentation mode. I know how to do this. Okay, down here. Okay. Did that do it?
Still seeing all the slides.
Okay. I clicked the little guy. There you go. So this is on the health approach to violence prevention. My name is Karen Volker, and I am the Director for Partnership and Violence Prevention here at URI. And I come to URI from an organization called Cure Violence Global, which was the pioneer of the health approach. So, and I was there for like 10 or 12 years before I came to URI last year. So what is the health approach to interrupting and stopping violence? It's based on a belief that violence is a behavior. So rather than thinking about violence being about bad people, it's about a bad behavior. And this reframing of it really opens up a lot of other ways to think about how we can go about preventing violence. So instead of the default setting of rule of law, lock them up, fight violence with violence, we can bring in behavioral science, neuroscience, and epidemiology. And I'll explain how those come into play here. In addition to believing that violence is a behavior, we believe that violence is a behavior that can be prevented, which is very important because a lot of times people tend to just wring their hands and think there's nothing we can do about violence. And here at URI, we firmly believe that there is something that we can do about violence. And not only is there something, but we should be thinking about what can we do? How can we be using our own influence to prevent violence? And the third part of this is understanding that this is a behavior that spreads in a contagious manner. And that's not just something that I'm making up. There are scientific studies, dozens of them, that show the ways in which violence is contagious. It's contagious between people, individual to individual, and it's contagious between types of violence, and it's contagious intergenerationally. And these are things that have been documented. If you want to go down that little rabbit hole, there was a workshop in 2013 hosted by the Institute of Medicine that specifically on the contagion of violence, and it has outlines of all of the different, not outlines, but summaries of all of the different studies that were presented on the ways in which violence is contagious. So thinking about violence in this way opens up a new way of thinking about what we can do. And one of the things that we know about behaviors is that before the age of 10 or 12, behaviors are acquired, maintained, or changed primarily through modeling and imitation. You can see this little boy walking behind the two gentlemen. He has no idea why he's walking that way. He's doing it because the big guys are doing it, right? So this is the primary form of acquiring behaviors at a young age. However, after the age of adolescence, behaviors are acquired, maintained, and changed primarily through peer pressure. So this means that after adolescence, what people think is their friends, what they think their friends expect them to do is what they then end up doing. And so we tend to really, we're influenced more than we even realize about this wanting to fit in and doing what other people do, especially those people around them. And so understanding this is really important if we're trying to change behaviors. So the spread is happening, but it can be interrupted, right? And the way it can be interrupted, that this program or this approach is based on the same approach that the World Health Organization uses to interrupt and stop the spread of a contagious disease. So we've talked a little bit about behavior science and what we know about behaviors. So from epidemiology, what do we know about how to stop the spread of a contagious process? The first thing is that you need to anticipate and prevent that violence or that behavior from spreading, right? So you have to be really looking at when it might happen, where it might happen, and how do we prevent it, right? Rather than just waiting for it to happen. The second thing is to change the behaviors of the highest risk. My computer's not advancing. Sorry, there we go. And that means really thinking about who is at highest risk for doing this violence and then trying to change that behavior. And this, in order to do this, you have to figure out not just who you're trying to reach, but then who will they listen to, right? So who are the people that those people listen to, and how do we get them to use their influence to try to change that individual's behavior or potential behavior, right? And then the third part is recognizing that behaviors are often supported by norms in the community. So what are the norms that support the existence of this or the continuation of violence? And how do we change those norms? So these are the three steps for interrupting and stopping the spread of a behavior, and they can be applied also in the case of violence. So we want to show the interruption from person to person, right? And as you interrupt it between these individuals, new norms can be established. Now it can be the result of the interruption, but it also can contribute to that interruption. So it kind of goes both ways. So what is the special role of faith actors in this? Like, why are we raising this with this particular group of people? We believe that faith actors, our community leaders, they have a special trust role in their communities within their own constituencies. They're viewed as credible within this is they view within your groups, your constituencies. You have this built-in audience or constituency that you can reach. Um, Often, and I think this is especially true for URI, you're viewed as neutral. So we are an interfaith organization. We believe in people working across the aisle, across differences. And so that, I think, it adds to the credibility of people in this network to use their voices to speak out about this. Within your communities, you have a higher than, I would say, normal visibility within your communities because of the roles that you play in the community as leaders, faith leaders. And you can help shape and set expectations or shift expectations and norms related to violence. So communication is really powerful if it's used well. And I want to show you some examples of public education materials that were created at Cure Violence about these was specifically before the 2020 elections. And so these are just examples to share with you so that you can get some ideas in case this is something that, and we can come back to this, that your organization might be interested in doing, really getting a message out about not doing violence and setting a different norm or expectation about violence. So I'll just have a couple of these to share. And there we go. So what are things that you could consider doing before the election? We're talking 3 weeks away here in North America, in the United States. Maybe it's less than that now. And so if you're in a position to speak publicly, give a sermon, talk of something to your constituents, and you want to address this issue, that could be helpful. Get people thinking about the role that they can play in actually talking. So everyone walks around with their own circle of influence, right? So we want to activate all of these different circles of influence. So it's not just us as individuals speaking about this. Anyone we talk to also has a circle of influence. And the more, if we can make this spread, I used to say when I was at Cure Violence, we want to make the cure contagious. So we want to be the instigator of a movement to really change norms and expectations around the violence that we might be anticipating during these elections, leading up to, during, and after the elections, and not just accept it as a given. And you can do this through a sermon type public speaking event. You can do it through social media flyers or signs, any sort of public education messaging. And you can possibly consider having a presence at polling stations if it's safe to do so, or somehow calling attention to this and demanding almost that there not be violence in your communities. And you can make it very local. So we can't change everything everywhere, but we could change things one polling station at a time, one location at a time. So that was all I wanted to share. I wanted to actually provoke some thinking and conversation, and see, happy to answer questions when we get to that portion of the session today. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Karen. Great information. And I just really appreciate how simple you made this and how relatable you really made the content. So thank you for that. Next, we'll hear from Medina Moore of the Arizona Faith Network. Please take it away.
Thank you so much, Reverend, and thank you all for having me this morning. I hope that my audio is well. I am Medina Moore. I am with the Arizona Faith Network here in Phoenix, Arizona. located. However, we do try to reach all of the corners of Arizona with the Faith Network. I am the voting rights organizer and working very, very hard this coming election, as many of you on this call, and very excited to be a part of the event today. So I appreciate URI and just want to give a shout out to my board and our executive director, Reverend Katie Sexton. So today I'm going to be talking about what AFN is doing to promote peaceful political engagement during the election. I am a preacher, so I decided to come up with 5 P's for you all about how we can promote peaceful political engagement and what AFN is doing. The first P I'm going to give you is prayer vigil. Prayer is going to be the essential key in elections, in this work, in ensuring that we have peace at our polling locations. No matter the faith that you are with, if you come together in agreement in prayer, organized, and focus on unity and wisdom and peaceful discourse, you can encourage your members, you can encourage the community to pray for the well-being of the nation, for candidates, for voters, and just to make a guided and thoughtful and peaceful choices on election day. And so we're having a virtual prayer vigil this election where we'll have all faith leaders from Arizona coming together, from Tucson to Phoenix, Maricopa County, Pima, Pinal, to come and offer up words of prayer, meditation, or guided, thoughtful speeches on this election. And then our second P is promoting dialogue. And what we do is we have facilitated respectful and open conversations within our community about political issues, about political violence. We have joined with other coalitions in regard to how we can show up in situations should there be violence and how to mitigate as faith people. One of our dialogues that we just completed with our Voices of Faith Votes for Justice series is why your faith matters when you vote, and how important it is to vote with the thoughts of what your faith would lead you to do, but not in a violent way, but in a way of peace. And we create safe spaces for our members in our community to discuss their views. And while they're discussing these views, also prioritizing listening, as we all come from different backgrounds and different faiths or different traditions, and understanding one another rather than debating. And then our third P I'll give you is positive political education. It's very important in the faith community to host positive political education. As we've seen on the other end, there are some that have been not positive. And so we're promoting that to be positive. We hosted workshops with informational sessions that would educate the community about the political process, such as what's on the ballot. Many people are not sure of how to vote, or it can be sometimes tricky on how to vote on the ballot. And so we covered 13 ballot propositions on the Arizona ballot, as well as issues from our balance perspective. And then we also promote fact-based and respectful dialogue that would encourage informed and peaceful decision-making. And so it's very important to positively educate, but also encourage others to research as they're learning about, what is on the ballot and what is being offered through a political education, and then have those dialogues in spaces that are safe. And our fourth one is going to be partnerships. Partnerships are going to be crucial because as you collaborate with others, you're creating a larger group of individuals that are on the same mind, same frame, same wisdom. We may not all use the same road to get there, but we're getting to the same place. And that's where that unity comes together. And when you have unity, you have peace. And so we partner with our local organizations, faith-based groups that are within the Valley. We partner with community groups, and we sponsor events to focus on peaceful political participation, whether that may be at the prayer vigil, as I spoke of, or also coming together at the Capitol for a time of encouraging voting, also encouraging peaceful participation for the election, and then also just fostering the spirit of unity and a shared purpose. We're all here because we want to vote. We all believe that every vote counts, that every voice should be heard, and every person should be able to vote. And when we stand together within our communities within Arizona, we have found that this has made us have a stronger front and safer polls. Arizona has had 3 elections this year, and our first 2 elections, we have had no incidents at the polling places, thankfully, and we're hoping to see that as well on November 5th as we go into the general election. And then the final P, my favorite, is peacekeeping. Peacekeeping at the polls is what we have organized around for our volunteers, our community members, to come and ensure that there is a calm atmosphere, that the atmosphere is respectful, that the polling locations have individuals who can help and support in any way if a voter should need. Our volunteers can offer assistance. They offer direct access to voters to help de-escalate if there are any tensions or should anything arise. They have a national hotline number that goes directly to lawyers who support any issues that may arise at polling locations, all while promoting a peaceful environment and a peaceful experience through our poll monitors. We encourage all our volunteers to poll monitor. We encourage all, even if you're not connected with our network, to poll monitor and be a peacekeeper at the polls. You don't have to be a religious person. You don't have to be a faith leader. If you care about ensuring that people are able to vote and have a seamless and smooth process in voting, peacekeeping is one of those P's that help to promote a peaceful political environment. They also can foster trust and reduce any potential for conflict or unrest. A lot of times when people see that there's folks there just handing out water or a Gatorade or just a smile on your face can change anything for something a person is going through, especially on a day like voting when there can be a lot of, either anticipation or anxiety. And sometimes people can feel that it might be unsafe because you'll hear lots of things on the news or other social media channels. And not everyone gets the information about the mis and disinformation. And so what happens is they go into polling places afraid or, fearful. And these peacekeepers create very peaceful environments there. And I think just the presence of people, which goes along with the P in peacekeeping, is very, very helpful. So there are still training dates available. If you are interested and you want to be fully equipped and ready for Election Day, you can sign up at our allvoting.org/AFN 2024. And that's through Election Protection Arizona. So again, prayer vigils, this is how we're promoting peaceful political engagement, promoting dialogue, wanting to make sure all are heard, positive political education, having those folks that are specifically educated on what's happening in the legislature and what's happening on the ballot, and educating our communities about that, partnerships and collaboration with other faith organizations and community groups, and then peacekeeping at our polling locations. And I'm just very excited to be able to share this information with you today and to be on this call, this Zoom. I'm glad to learn things and excited to speak with you all during Q&A about ways that we have done this and also any ways that I can give information or assist in doing it as well. And so I will drop the sign up in the chat for those that are interested. But again, thank you for your time today. And I will hand the floor back over to Reverend Rucker.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I love those P's. That was fantastic. I'm pretty sure too. So, I love that alliteration. Thank you all for your attention. And for those just joining us, please go ahead in the chat, share your affiliation with URI, where in the world you're joining us from. Just introduce yourself so we know who all is in the room live with us. Also, we will have Q&A after our next presenter. So feel free to share your questions using the chat. All right, finally, we come down to Geneva Blackmer from the URI North America. She's a Global Council trustee. Take it away. We're looking forward to your presentation.
Can everyone see my screen? Yeah?
Yeah,
Okay,
looks good.
great. So hi everyone. Thank you, Will. Like you said, I'm a Global Council trustee for North America. I am also a researcher and a PhD candidate in the field of digital theology and digital religious communication. So I want to discuss briefly how we can counter misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech online, particularly in the coming weeks leading up to the election. So to do this, first I want to, my slide going to change, there we go. First, I want to set a baseline of understanding a few key terms. I think it's really important that we understand the intersectionality between the spread of disinformation and things like digital literacy. So you might have heard the term the digital divide. This was a phrase coined in the 1990s, and historically it's been a way to articulate the relationship between technology and accessibility. Often this concept is framed in the language of the haves and the have-nots. So either you have access or you do not have access, reflecting the physical availability of digital technologies and internet connectivity. By recognizing this, we can begin to observe a clear chain of causality between lack of access and harm, because technology is complexly woven into existing social systems and processes, and groups which already face exclusion and marginalization are more susceptible to the digital divide and will consequently have fewer opportunities for access. But we now know that the digital divide more accurately encompasses a gradation of varying degrees of access. And one of the forms in which it commonly manifests is known as digital illiteracy. So digital literacy refers to the individual and social skills needed to effectively manage meaning in an era of digitally networked, often blended communication. This is far more complex than simply saying literacy versus illiteracy. There are varying degrees of digital literacy. So for example, a person might be able to use a smartphone and to engage with social media, but they may not have the literacy skills required to discern information. And as a result, they cannot identify credible sources. They become more susceptible and vulnerable to being taken advantage of, whether that's by scam sites, by political and election interference, as we're primarily talking about today, and simply the perpetuation and influence of false information. So literacy is not just a cognitive, but a social practice that engages real physical artifacts, content, skills, and support. Therefore, acquisition of digital literacy is not only a matter of education, but also power and social capital. I'm providing this context in the hope that we might enter this conversation from a space of compassion and empathy, because I truly do not believe that the masses of people who share content, not those who create it, but those who share it, which exasperates the spread of misinformation and disinformation, necessarily do so in a manner which is intentionally malicious, but rather it's often a digital illiteracy problem, which means we can confront this problem. We can use digital literacy as a tool to address misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech online. One example is there is overall less monitoring of disinformation spread in languages other than English. So often immigrant communities and diaspora communities are disproportionately susceptible to disinformation as they frequently receive their news from social media networks and apps that are specific to their country of origin. And many of these apps have even less monitoring for disinformation than a site like Facebook, if we can believe that. So at URI North America, we developed a toolkit to accompany Interfaith America's curriculum, #Interfaith, engaging religious diversity online, which highlights key elements of bias and differentiates between truth, misinformation, and disinformation. And this is something I will share with everyone who registered, but if you're interested in actually accessing the full curriculum, I believe they're currently offering scholarships where you can take the course for free. And I'll send out a link to that as well. Since disinformation is such a huge concern for all of us, not only as interfaith community, which aims to counteract religious xenophobia and hate speech online, but also as citizens who aim to protect the integrity of our elections and the value of truth in the social fabric of our societies, I wanted to share just a little bit from this #Interfaith toolkit that might be useful to us as we navigate digital spaces. I hope we can understand to some degree that digital spaces are not neutral, that we all, this comes with an acknowledgement that we all possess a bias, meaning we have a lens that influences the way we see the world based on our upbringing, our knowledge base and experiences. And although having biases is completely normal, it can impact the way we process information online. Often we accept information as truth only because it affirms a point of view or side, which confirms our bias. Consequently, it's very important that we verify these sources of information to the best of our ability. So the toolkit offers guiding questions for how to fact check information you are engaging with online. So it gives you a couple questions. Where did you find this information? Was it shared with you by a friend or a family member? This is a very common way that misinformation and disinformation spreads. Does this person understand the issue? Do they have authority to speak on the issue? Is this a reputable source? Is the information you're reading or watching based on firsthand accounts, academic research, or is it possibly just hearsay? Does your source of information have a particular bias? Often we obtain our news and information from media channels that inherently confirm our own political biases. What are the implications of posting this information? This is perhaps the most important question because disinformation that spreads online can perpetuate religious xenophobia and polarization towards marginalized religious communities, which has a direct consequence in the real world and can translate into actual physical violence. So there are real world consequences for what we share online, and we need to start having better accountability and ownership of this. Finally, it's necessary to understand the intention and the style in which false information spreads. So there's a difference between misinformation and disinformation. Misinformation is false or inaccurate information, which is often not intentionally malicious. So this can be something like a rumor or an insult or a prank, while disinformation is created with deliberate and malicious content such as hoaxes, conspiracy theories, spam, and propaganda. So this is more likely what you're going to encounter around the election is disinformation. Spreads fear and suspicion among the population. But like everything else, false information exists more as a gradation with varying degrees of severities. And of course, the most severe of these is hate speech. So hate speech, while not all instances of hate speech lead to hate crime, all hate crimes involve previous instances of hate speech. In the worst scenarios, when hate speech and hate crimes are left unchecked, situations can degenerate still further and lead to crimes against humanity and genocide. While all hate speech is potentially dangerous, not all hate speech is equally dangerous. It's important to recognize the diverse forms and degrees, as well as to consider its broader societal context. So there's different criteria for establishing what constitutes hate speech, and this can, of course, be useful when examining content you encounter online. So does the speech target a group or an individual as a member of a group? Does the message express hatred? Does the speech cause harm? Does the speaker intend to cause harm? Does the speech incite malicious actions beyond the speech itself? Is the speech either public or directed at a member of the group? Does the context make violence possible? And does the speech have a redeeming purpose? If and when we do encounter hate speech, how should we respond? Here are a few useful guidelines for you to follow. So first is to pause, to refrain from making any hateful comments yourself or relaying such content, fact check, to check the content's origin with the help of search engines and fact checking tools and other reliable sources, to educate, to help raise awareness of hate speech by engaging your family and friends in conversations about how this causes harm, to challenge, to undermine hateful content with positive messages, to support by taking a public stand for and extending solidarity to people who are targets of hate speech, and finally to report. As we all know, most online platforms and communities have rules for users to keep the discussion respectful, and you have the ability to report hate messages to administrators. So finally, as I mentioned earlier, the root of many of these problems, I feel, is in fact digital illiteracy. And luckily, this is something we as an interfaith community can actually address. There are many different types of programs and opportunities that we might consider in the context of interfaith cooperation, and the ability of our faith communities to collaborate and leverage resources to provide access to different opportunities. So obviously, when we're talking about digital literacy, the development of digital literacy programs and courses which offer one-on-one technology training is an important point. I personally was a digital literacy instructor for the Miami County Public Libraries in Ohio. And I can tell you this is a very effective and impactful way to eradicate digital illiteracy. And of course, we can educate, empower, and cooperate collectively and individually to help bridge the digital divide. This can look much like the conversation we're having right now. So I urge you to consider these and how your own interfaith or faith communities could leverage your resources to proactively address this issue. And I think that's going to move us now into the discussion. So Will, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Thank you so much. So much robust information and some great takeaways for sure. Karen actually is going to kick us off with a great question, which is the speech dehumanizing? If so, she says it's a particularly dangerous form of hate speech. So let's dive into that. How can we make our speech more humanizing? And don't all answer at once.
Hi, Will. Thanks for picking up on that in the chat. Yeah, it is one of the forms of hate speech that has been shown to lead more directly to violence, when it happens. Because if people view somebody as less human, it's easier to then commit violence against that person or that group of people. And so just being really attuned to that and listening for that and calling it out when it happens is a very important thing that we can all do. So that's the only point I wanted to make with that. It is often the case leading up to genocides. You see that people are often referred to in terms that they're animals, or and if you're thinking of them as an animal, it's much easier to go do harm against that individual. And we've even seen this to a certain extent in the rhetoric around our own elections. So really watching out for it and calling it out and trying to stop it, I think, is an important thing that we should all be watching for.
Yeah, great point. Medina, I've got one that's for you. So faith communities in Arizona have been a strong voice for peace. How do you balance the desire for political engagement with the need to remain neutral or unifying across different political viewpoints?
Thank you. That's a great question. So as our faith group, we balance this desire for the political engagement. We understand that, we have groups from either side. We're nonpartisan. And so we come into this with the mindset of peace. It's okay to ask questions. It's okay to want to discuss, because open discuss and dialogue is important. But the balance of it is remembering our core focus. And that is continuing to be a place of peace, a place of respect when we have the dialogue, and not allowing our own political desires, our own political beliefs and thoughts to overtake the aspect of unity within our faith communities.
And I have a follow-up on that. Is it actually polarizing to try to appease all sides in an issue?
That we've seen those challenges at times, but our goal is always bringing our communities back to that one goal. And the goal is to it's not to polarize, but it's to have that same thought or mind frame that will get us to the goal. And so our biggest thing, we work with rabbis, imams, we work with Buddhist community members, our faith leaders. And so we know even within the faith, some may think differently how to approach a political situation. But where is that common thing that we all agree on? where is that common ground? And in that, we tend to find when we have discussions or when we have a little harder discussions, we get to that common ground a lot easier as we try to agree on one thing.
Yeah, Trevor Noah has a philosophy of finding one point of agreement with anyone. So maybe we can get him engaged in our cooperative circle
Yes.
some. Awesome. And this question is for the panel. With the rise of social media, misinformation and hate speech can spread faster than ever. What are some creative ways faith communities can use these same platforms to spread messages of peace, unity, and truth?
I can jump in there. Our faith community will do some weekly meditations. We also will do some social media blasts kind of to direct people to trusted sites, trusted resources on battling the mis and disinformation. But sometimes, a lot of times, it is anxiety or anxious thoughts. And so that's where we bring in our weekly meditations in of am I just spending too much time on social media? Am I spending too much time watching TV and engaging in too harmful rhetoric? And a lot of times we just have to decompress. But on the practical side, outside of meditation, we also have lots of tools and resources within working with our communities to address mis and disinformation and direct those to right resources that can help them get the proper information when they are voting, when they are at the polling places, as well as when they're talking to their other communities. A lot of things are word of mouth. If I saw a plane in the sky and my friend saw a UFO, they're going to say it was a UFO and they're going to run with that information. But I saw the plane and we know that planes are flying out. And so it's very important within your community of people that you speak with, not sharing this information, but finding truth. And so we like to connect with community organizations that are sharing factual information around elections and voting.
That's such important points. And Eva, you use social media and the interwebs so very well. I want to come to you next, but before I do, Karen made a statement that I thought was incredibly powerful in the chat. Karen, would you elaborate on this around finding the idea of nonviolence being the common thing to agree on?
Thanks, Will, for picking up on that. Yeah, so often we've seen that the two sides are just, they're going to not agree on the substance of the matter. But if we can get both sides to agree that they both don't want violence and they say that publicly, that is a big step forward, right? So when we talk about violence prevention and you talk about peace building or conflict mediation, often people are focused on like resolving this difference, right? But what we have right now is a situation where we have a higher than usual potential for violence around these elections. And we don't have time right now to resolve all the differences between the people who are going to be on, who are on the different sides of each issue. So we need to really be prioritizing the not doing violence while we get to that common understanding or reach agreement on things or find a bipartisan solution or what have you. But in the meantime, could we all at least agree that we don't want to do violence and that we want to pursue a peaceful negotiation or mediation or resolution to whatever the issue is. And really, if we make that the focus, people can generally agree to that because people really don't want violence. Most people really don't want violence. We need to appeal to that side of their human nature.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And Eva, I know you want to probably double click onto that to use the terminology for technology, right? Double click, it opens things up. Okay, bad joke. Sorry, go ahead.
Thanks. Well, yeah, I would say, I don't know. My personal take is that social media is a bit of an echo chamber that is quite unproductive to engage with. Generally, it because people are coming into it in a space that's in a way that's quite prone to conflict and very argumentative because they can kind of hide behind their keyboard and they don't have to really engage with people in real life. So I actually think it's much better for interfaith and faith communities to use the internet to engage virtually like we are in this space right here, right now, because it's much more difficult, as Karen said earlier, this dehumanizing piece. It's very difficult to dehumanize people that you are in relationship with. So I think it's really important for us to move people to online spaces where they can actually cultivate relationships and have constructive dialogue, and to also not be afraid to create space to sit in some of that tension, because I think it's really important for us to not kind of shy away from that, but to not do it in, this sort of echo chamber of social media that I don't think just doing a post is necessarily going to get through to someone, because like I said, everyone is already engaging with their own confirmation bias about information. But if you can get them into a room, you can do interfaith programming, I think that is much more productive way to handle this. And I really encourage everyone to have either virtual or in-person dialogue as often as they can. I think that's probably one of the biggest things we need leading up to the election.
Thank you for that. And this is for the panel. Medina, I'd like to start with you, then move to Karen, and Eva, I'll have you take us home. Young people are an incredibly important part of this type of work, and they bring a fresh energy and fresh ideas and are often less jaded with life in general. But the question in that is, how can faith communities be a source of healing after a divisive or even violent election season? What role do the spiritual practices play in this healing process, and how can we make them accessible for young people?
Thank you, Reverend. I believe that faith communities can be a source of healing, first getting out into the communities and connecting with these young people. We've had ASU reach out to us about what the faith communities are doing during this election to create peaceful environments. The young people are absolutely looking for that avenue, and we have to be present. Bridging the gap between a lot of the generations, I think, is one of the biggest things that I see, and making sure that we're not leaving the young people behind, but also we're listening and giving them a voice, and letting their voice be heard in this time, realizing that some of those religious or sacred cows that we may have in other generations, they're going to do it different, but they're going to get the work done. They're not going to just let this world or communities fall by the wayside. They're very interested in assuring for peaceful elections, but also just a peaceful environment. So the biggest thing for me is faith communities letting young people's voices be heard, letting them advocate, understanding autonomy and how these generations work. And I think all of us have, I feel like it's like one body, as scriptures say, and you're the arm, you're the leg, you're the head, but we can all work together as one body to move forward and to see one, mitigated violence in places, but also to understand how each other works and work fully as one. And then can you repeat the second half of the question?
Just asking about particular spiritual practices that they can employ.
The wonderful Vasubi too, who invited me here with Arizona Faith Network, he is the one who leads our weekly meditations, and we find those to be very, very helpful, just to meditate, just to rest in one space and one mind, and also, just to decompress. And so I think also offering practices, you're not trying to push your religion on them, but also just offering spaces to decompress, offering spaces to speak if needed, and offering spaces for voices to be heard. But my main takeaway is not silencing the voice. We have to not silence the voice of the young people.
Thank you. Great takeaway. Karen.
Thank you so much. So I guess I really just want to appreciate that you brought up the healing after the elections. I think it's super important, and I think one of the sort of a very important step in that direction is to acknowledge the hurt that people might be feeling on all sides. Everybody that is feeling, everyone's going to come out of this probably feeling somehow like they were somehow harmed by the process, right? And so we need to acknowledge the hurt that people are feeling. And in that acknowledgement, begin the process of trying to reach out and to that common ground. You may not agree, but people will be more willing to listen to you if you've acknowledged first that you understand that they are have what they are feeling and that they are feeling hurt or harmed by the result of the election or what have you, or the way things went down. Um, I want to take my opportunity in my final, say though, to double click on two things that Medina said, which is about partnership and presence at the polls, or peacekeeping at the polls. I think it's super important to have that presence. And if we can do that, if by reaching out to other groups, people of other faiths, other faith-based groups, community organizations, and joining together to form that presence. It's a very powerful presence if you're there and you're really standing up for people's right to vote and people's right to vote peacefully, right? Without violence and without the threat of violence. And I want to linger on that word for a second, because the threat of violence itself can keep people away from the polls, right? And fear is very much a motivator for people's behaviors. And so we need to really kind of have our antennas up for when there might be people might be feeling threatened and how that's impacting them, and when fear might be intervening and interfering with people's behaviors and how making the choices that they're making. And so to the extent that people can reach out to their other community members and form those sort of coalitions around either prayer vigils or just presence at the poll or what have you, I think it'll be very important in the days leading up to, during, and after the elections, even just being visibly out there, calling for calm and peaceful responses to everything.
Wow,
So
the
thank
power
you.
of presence. Yeah, thank you for highlighting that and double clicking on Medina there. Eva.
Sure. Well, I think I would emphasize what both Medina and Karen stated to some degree. I do think this question about youth is an interesting one in the interfaith space, because we historically have a pretty difficult time engaging youth in general. So thinking about how we can best support youth, I think part of that has to do with welcoming them into our spaces. And I think to do this, we need to get a little bit more serious about reconciliation and accountability. So I think healing isn't just personal, but also systemic in this way. And we need to really figure out how to strategize to make our spaces, feel safe for young people. I do think young people actually do experience a lot of fear. There's a lot of existential kind of threats and dread, and with the climate crisis and so many different things that are happening in the world, living through the pandemic. And so I definitely echo what Medina said about amplifying the voices of young people, using our platforms to highlight the voices of youth leadership, and as well as engaging the contemplative practices. And I know Vastu represents the Zen Buddhist tradition, but contemplation is something present in all of our world's traditions, and interfaith spaces really can offer a way to make that accessible in a way that resonates with young people, even if it's through a non-faith perspective. There's great secular mindfulness meditation practices that they can engage in. So making that available, and just creating additional space again to cultivate relationship, because coming out of this election and the fear and the harm that people will be exposed to, I think it's going to be once again more important than ever to create space for dialogue and to cultivate relationship and mutual understanding between all of us, despite where we land on the political spectrum.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That accountability piece is certainly huge. So, as we wrap up, I just want to express my deepest gratitude to all of our panelists for their insightful presentations and contributions to this conversation. I have several ahas and takeaways from this, and I just am really, really grateful for your investment in us today. I also want to thank all of you who participated and engaged and watched and chatted in and sent in questions. You make this conversation what it is, so thank you as well. Let's continue to promote peace, understanding, and ethical engagement in our communities. Thank you for being a part of this important discussion. And as I always remind you, you are not just a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop, and what you do matters. So live compassionately and be the presence of peace. Thanks for being here today.